training supplier will have their own codes, a portal will have their own codes. Some sort of standardization is required, and that's just one area. So the portal is ideally placed to be able to develop those industry standards. And it can develop protocols to standardize business processes. So even when one training supplier speaks to another training supplier, the method, the business process that they use is being standardized by the portal. It can provide independent forums for discussions. It can provide affiliate programs that become virtual portals into this portal. It can form alliances. And the financial power of this portal starts to be incredible because all of these financial transactions flow through the central component, which is the portal. The future for training e-communities, first of all, when you do a search, you won't do a search for the provider. You'll do your first instance search will be for the education portal. And there, once you're there, you will then do a more refined search. It will be a truly personalized experience. And what will be available? All courses, all institutions, all levels, right the way from prep schools to higher education, further education, and industry qualifications as well. Centralization of information will exist. For example, centralizing PCAS for EU. Students can select any subject, location, language of instruction, and the institutions will be rated and reviewed. This diagram here describes the second-generation portal, where what we're attempting to do here is to show how there are customized tools developed by the e-community for each type, each category of the community, and thereby linking and standardizing the communication methods of all members of the community with each other. That is true flexibility. The future for portals, the portals will become so personalized that you'll have one portal per person. You will have your own portal that understands your needs. It's your personal guide to the internet, to the services, to the products. It knows your likes, it knows your dislikes. It knows which restaurants you like, which theaters you like, where in the theater you like to sit. It will be personalized to show you your shares. It'll know about the music that you like and so on. So the writing is on the wall for customers, for resellers, and for suppliers. It's not the strongest or the most intelligent that survives. It's the most responsive to change. And the change is now, the future for all training. I'd like to welcome Nick Stern. Bookacourse.com has been in a continual effort to keep up to date with the changing environment of the internet and the effect that it's having on education. We've commissioned a bookacourse.com survey conducted by Mori on the attitudes of internet users with regard to education in this new age. I'd like to welcome Nick Stern, the chairman of London Economics and senior vice president of and chief economist of World Bank, to present the results. Ladies and gentlemen, Nick Stern.
Thank you very much to bookacourse.com for the invitation and for the introduction. I should say that I am chairman of London Economics. I will be the chief economist of the World Bank from early July, so I'm speaking here as the chairman of London Economics. Now, in introducing the results of this survey, I want to begin by putting it into context, because this is part of something which is extremely important. I mean, what we're talking about here is what drives the growth of nations. We're talking about, in particular, the accumulation of what economists call human capital, building the skills of people. Because those nations which are going to grow most quickly are those nations which build human capital most quickly and use it most effectively. So this is part of a very big issue here. We sometimes get involved in the details and the technicalities, but what's going on is something extremely important. And those of you who like your economic history will be familiar with the wonderful series of books by Eric Hobsbawm, starting with the French Revolution, where from 1789 to 1848 he has the Age of Revolution. From 1848 to 75, he has the age of capital, and from 1875 to 1914, he has the age of empire, and his most recent book on these lines was 1914 to 1990, the age of extremes. Now, he's probably too old to write the next book, but the next book should be the age of human capital, because what we're seeing in the latter part of the 20th century, the first years of this century, is human capital, its generation, its allocation, driving the growth process. Now, Gordon Brown, just a few years ago, generated some hilarity by actually using a term which economists do use, endogenous growth. And it was paraphrased as erogenous growth and so on. But what he was talking about, and he had read a little bit of economics, I have to say, was the idea that the growth process is not simply in the medium or long run generated by the rate of growth of population, as many earlier theories had it generated. It was about the accumulation of human capital through the choices that individuals made, through the training choices that they made, and through the influence that individuals had on each other by their own learning. And what now was just a small part of one microeconomics course has become, in most of the major universities, a central part of the central courses on what drives growth. So people now look first at human capital and the externalities, or that's another piece of jargon, the influence which one person has on another. Secondly, they look at the role of services in increasing productivity. There was a time when economics courses, particularly the ones where those of you old enough to remember Nicholas Caldor, he was a teacher of mine in Cambridge in the 1960s, and he saw the driving force of economic growth as the accumulation of capital in manufacturing, because manufacturing was the big source of productivity. And he reflected there the general view of the economics, and not just the economics profession. Services were seen as haircuts. In putting together the first national income statistics during the UK in the Second World War, James Mead, who subsequently won the Nobel Prize, turned to Richard Stone, who also won the Nobel Prize. They were trying to work out the role of the service sector in national income. And James turned to Richard and he said, "Richard, how often do you have your haircut?" And then they worked out how long it took to have the haircut, the amount that was paid. They worked out the number of people that had the haircut, and that was haircuts in the national income statistics. Now, if you think of services like that, it's not easy to improve productivity if you think of services as haircuts, because that's a process which takes a fairly standard amount of time. It's one process which I hope doesn't get subject to too heavy technology. But now, if you think of services as retailing, as education, as transport, and all these things, you'll see that the view of services as a static sector which has not got high productivity is completely wrong. And it's the training and it's the internet technology that's transforming services. And lastly, if you look at the story of what has driven the remarkable growth in the United States over the last year or over the last decade or so, all the stories are about the combination of competition on one side and technology and skills on the other. And they're mutually reinforcing. Competition forces skills and technology, and skills and technology, for all the reasons we've just been hearing about, intensify competition. So there's a very powerful mutually reinforcing relationship here. I would also say that the same mutually reinforcing relationship between competition on one hand and technology and human capital on the other is being seen in India. I don't know how many of you know that India has shown growth rates of national income over the last 7 or 8 years of around 7%. Another couple of years of that, and it's real prospect that we'll see it, India will have doubled its GNP in a decade. So that's quite phenomenal. And if you look at where that has happened, it's been very regional in India. It's been West India and it's been South India. It's been the area around Bombay, or Mumbai as it now is, and around Bangalore and Hyderabad in South India. Why? Because those are the areas where the human capital, technology and service sectors have been strongest and where competition has been strongest. So what we're talking about is not some abstract ideas, but a very deep, fundamental and important set of processes which are driving the big economies of the world, in the very developed economies and the less developed economies. Now let's see if we could turn to the survey now, some aspects of the way these ideas are reflected in the survey. It's absolutely fascinating survey, and I've only been able to, or suggested we just take 3 slides, 3 sets of questions from that survey. It's much, much richer than that, of course, so this is just being selected from the few of them. Now, the first one is asking people about where they get their information on training from. And over 50% of the respondents said from the internet. I have to say, when I've been teaching a course, MSc on Global Market Economics in the LSE, and I asked them, the students, before coming here, where did they find out about LSE's course on Global Market Economics? They found out from the LSE website. So people are looking at the internet to find out where to go. Now, when I was thinking about universities in the 60s, we went to the people in school. People who were in work went to the people in work or to the local library. That's changed fundamentally, and it's a very important and striking result from the survey. And those who wish to have their products recognised, in whatever sector they're in, had better look to the internet if they are to be taken seriously in the marketplace. Now, secondly, who is it that is benefiting here from this process? Now, what struck me is that not that one number was bigger than any others, because if you take that 35% and you split it up into school children and university students, you get numbers in the high teens. So what you're seeing there is not that it's one group that's benefiting from this, it's spread right through different categories in society. So I think that's another extremely important result from this survey. You're not simply talking about university students or school children. They make up together only about, or just over, a third. You're seeing it spread right across the population. That's a very important result. Now, lastly, people were asked to speculate a little bit about the potential of this kind of training. And I think what is remarkable here is the recognition of the importance of the internet in lifelong learning. Labour markets have become more competitive, job security has gone down, and that process of competition and reduction in lifelong employment with one employer means that people are going to have to educate themselves for competition in the labour market over time. We should also recognise, and here I'll add in something as someone who's probably older than the average in this kind of community, you should think about what you do when you retire. And if you've got 30 or 40 years of retirement, learning should be a fundamental part of that process too. So lifelong learning, I think we should mean lifelong learning, up to 75, 80, or however long we're happy enough to live. So these results are very striking and very important, and illustrate the kinds of remarks I was trying to make about putting all this in the bigger picture. Now let me very briefly, in conclusion, give you some examples. Now the first one is from my future employer, the World Bank, and then I'll talk about my current employment at London Economics and also at the London School of Economics. Now, let me just give 2 examples. The World Bank, over the last few years, has established a global development network. And what that is doing is linking up all the research organizations of relevance that we can find around the world, so that researchers who may be in Ethiopia, they may be in Sri Lanka, they may be in Peru, can understand what other researchers are doing and communicate with them. For all too long, researchers in poorer countries